I wasn't supposed to go to that party. I had already made up my mind, politely decline, say I had a headache, or maybe just pretend I forgot. After all, Vanessa had been making it more and more clear that I was unwanted in my own son's home. The eye rolls, the forced smiles, the way her voice dropped an octave when she said my name. But Daniel had insisted. Just a few people, Mom. Casual. It'll mean a lot to me. His voice on the phone was clipped like he was hiding something, just like he always was, when guilt lingered beneath the surface. So I went. I wore my favorite blouse. The one Richard gave me for our 30th wedding anniversary. Soft ivory, with pearl buttons. He used to say it made me look like class wrapped in sunlight. I hadn't worn it since he died. Putting it on again felt like armor. I even tied my hair back and added a hint of blush. Just a gathering, I told myself. Just be pleasant. When I arrived, the backyard was glowing. String lights, hung from the pergola jazz music, played low beneath the hum of conversation, and trays of catered hors d'oeuvres floated between clutches of well-dressed people. The kind of people Vanessa liked: women in fitted dresses, holding delicate cocktails, men talking about crypto and property taxes. I felt like a misplaced memory the moment I stepped in. Before I could set my purse down, I heard her voice slice through the crowd. "Oh my God," Vanessa said loudly, holding her wine glass like a scepter. "Doesn't Maggie look like Canuela, my old maid from Houston Laughter? Not just hers." The whole circle joined in laughing at the punchline that was me. I froze. Not because I didn't understand what she said, but because it was so sharp, so rehearsed, so public. Her tone was bright, performative, like she wanted everyone to join the joke. And they did. People chuckled into their drinks. One woman gave me a once-over, then sipped her Prosecco. I stood there holding a glass of red someone had just handed me, cheeks burning, heart pounding. And then I looked at Daniel. He was across the yard, talking to a man in a golf cap. Our eyes met, and he looked away. That moment, his silence was louder than Vanessa's insult, louder than the laughter. My son pretending he didn't hear, pretending I wasn't standing there being humiliated by his wife. He didn't defend me, didn't even move. I turned, slowly, walked to the guest bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the closed lid of the toilet. The mirror above the sink reflected back a version of myself I didn't recognize. Lipstick, smudged eyes, tired shoulders, slumped under the weight of being invisible in the house I once built. I had given so much, raised Daniel with every ounce of grace I had. And now I was being reduced to a punchline in my own backyard. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared. Richard wouldn't have let this happen. That's the thought that kept circling. If he were alive, Vanessa never would have dared. She used to fake her kindness around me when he was here, wrapping her condescension in honey. But after he passed, the mask slipped. The disdain showed. And tonight, she didn't even bother to hide it. When I finally stepped out of the bathroom, trying to slip away unnoticed, Elena, our housekeeper of 15 years, stood in the hallway folding napkins. She looked up, saw my face, and just gave me a nod. Not pity, not surprise, just knowing. She understood, and that was the moment something shifted. Not a scream, not a rage, but a quiet click like a gear locking into a new position. I wasn't angry yet, not completely, but I was clear. Something inside me whispered that this house, these people, this version of family no longer felt like mine, and that something had to change. I had brought my husband home here after his first heart surgery, cooked Christmas dinner in that kitchen, taught Daniel how to ride a bike on the front driveway, and now I was being laughed at by a woman who hadn't even been around when Daniel still had baby teeth. I drove home in silence, both hands on the wheel, the road glowing under the streetlights. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink, because in that stillness I made a decision. Not to fight, not to argue, but to watch, to listen, and then when the time came, act. The morning after the party, I was still in the same blouse. I hadn't changed. I hadn't slept. My hair was flattened on one side from leaning against the arm of the couch all night, the throw blanket still draped across my lap like a forgotten promise. I moved slowly through the house, pouring myself a cup of coffee I barely touched. It was bitter and black, like the thoughts circling my head. The refrigerator hummed softly in the quiet. Richard's old fishing magnet still clung stubbornly to the metal, holding up a fading photo of Daniel at 12, his cheeks round, his eyes bright cake on his chin. I stared at that photo for a long time. At the little boy I raised, the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and teary apologies, the boy who had once called me his favorite person in the world. Now that boy was a man who looked away when I was publicly humiliated. I kept replaying the scene in my mind. Vanessa's shrill laugh, the smirks from strangers, the wine glass trembling in my hand, Daniel's silence. That silence, more than the insult, haunted me. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. He chose not to defend me, not to acknowledge me, and I had to ask myself, how long had he been choosing her over me? At exactly 8:02 a.m., my phone rang. It was Elena. "Can I stop by?" she asked. The question alone startled me. Elena had never asked in 15 years of service. She'd just shown up rain or shine with her soft voice and her dependable hands. So I said yes, even though I had no idea why. 20 minutes later, she was at my door. No makeup. Hair pulled back in a simple clip. She wasn't carrying her usual cleaning tote. Instead, she had a small canvas bag worn at the edges. And her eyes, usually gentle, were sharp-focused, almost burning with urgency. She didn't sit. She walked directly to the counter and pulled out a manila envelope. Her voice was low. "You need to see this," she said. I reached for it, my fingers unsteady. Inside were bank letters, printed statements, official-looking documents, and something that made my stomach cave in, a mortgage agreement with my name on it, only I had never signed it. "My signature," I murmured. "It's not yours," Elena said. "I found it in Daniel's office. He left the drawer open last night. I don't know what made me look, but I felt something was wrong." I touched the ink, traced the fake loop in the M of my name. It was close. Whoever did this had studied my handwriting carefully, but it wasn't mine, and I knew exactly what it meant. They had taken out a second mortgage in my name on the house I legally owned. "Why would he do this?" I whispered, though I already knew. The answer was always the same. Money, power, control. "I think it's her," Elena said. "Vanessa. She's been pushing him for more. They've been fighting about the remodel. She wants to redo the kitchen, the patio, everything. She's been saying things like, 'Your mom won't be around much longer anyway.'" Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. "I wasn't going to tell you, but after what happened last night, I couldn't stay quiet. My breath caught, because suddenly it wasn't just an insult in the backyard anymore. It was a pattern, a plan. And I realized with chilling clarity, they weren't just waiting for me to fade away quietly. They were preparing to erase me on paper, legally, financially, emotionally. I shook my head slowly. "I don't know what to do." Elena stepped closer. Her voice was steady now, like a compass. "You do know," she said. "You just don't want to be the kind of woman who does it." That hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. I had always prided myself on being composed, kind, graceful. I didn't yell, I didn't make scenes, I avoided confrontation like it was fire. But Vanessa, she had already decided who she was willing to be. The kind of woman who mocks, schemes, forges. And Daniel had let it happen. Whether out of weakness or willful blindness, it didn't matter anymore. The result was the same. And I couldn't pretend anymore. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone, the manila envelope in front of me like a loaded weapon. I thought about Richard. What would he have done? What would he have said? and then like a whisper from the past. I remembered the box, the one in the closet where we kept the will, the deed, the trust, the truth, and for the first time since the night he died, I felt him with me, not as a memory but as a presence, a hand on my shoulder, a voice in my mind, telling me that silence was no longer noble, that forgiveness without justice was just surrender in disguise. I didn't sleep that night, but I wasn't restless. I was awake, and I was ready. I don't remember walking to the hall closet. I just remember standing in front of it, barefoot, holding the manila envelope in one hand and a flashlight in the other. It was barely 5 a.m. The sky outside was still dark, and the air in the house felt heavier than usual, like it knew something sacred was about to be disturbed. The lockbox was still there, same shelf, same dust. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. The key was on the same ring as my church fob, which I hadn't used in months. As I opened the metal box, the scent of old paper and a faint trace of Richard's cologne drifted up like memory. Inside were the documents that once felt like protection. Now they felt like evidence. I reached for the folder labeled Trust and Will. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to confirm. And there it was, in black and white. Full ownership of the house belonged to me. Every account, every asset mine. No co-signers, no joint property. No clause giving Daniel or Vanessa any rights while I was alive. Richard had made sure of that. He had trusted me. He had wanted me protected. I sat down on the floor, the folder spread open across my lap like a shield. For years I had believed Daniel was helping me out of kindness, managing the bills, making calls, guiding me through the bureaucracy of widowhood. I thought it was love, support, devotion, but now I saw it for what it was, an illusion. He hadn't been helping, he'd been positioning, inching his way into control one small favor at a time. A login here, a signature there, and then the forgery. The mortgage was not just a betrayal, it was a strategy. Someone had forged my name to secure a second mortgage against a house they didn't even legally own. They were gambling with my security, my legacy, my home. And I knew deep down, Vanessa had orchestrated it. Daniel might have held the pen, but she had handed it to him. That realization didn't come with rage. It came with clarity, like a fog lifting after years of trying to pretend things were normal. I didn't need a confrontation. I needed a plan. And the first step was understanding how deep the roots of this deception went. Later that morning, I called Stanley DeMarco Richards' old estate lawyer. I hadn't spoken to him since the will was read. He sounded surprised to hear my voice, but quickly fell into the steady professionalism I remembered. I told him I needed a private consultation. No family present. Urgent. He offered me an appointment the next morning at 10 a.m. After hanging up, I sat in silence, breathing slowly, my heart pounding, like I'd just finished running a marathon. I wasn't afraid. I was awake. Fully, deeply, painfully awake. And that's when Elena called again. She showed up that afternoon wearing a denim jacket and carrying another envelope. I found something else, she said, behind the bookshelf in the den. I think Richard meant for you to find it. Inside was a single page, folded carefully, Richard's handwriting on the front. It wasn't a letter. It was a journal entry, dated 3 months before he died. I worry Vanessa's ambition is getting into Daniel's bones. She's not cruel. She's careful. And I think he's letting her become the loudest voice in his life. Maggie, if anything happens to me, watch her closely. Don't let charm make you blind. I read it 3 times. The same looping cursive I had once watched him write in while he drank his evening tea. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was a quiet, serious warning. One he couldn't bring himself to say aloud. He knew me too well. He knew I avoided conflict like the plague. But he also knew eventually I'd find the truth. I looked at Elena. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone grounded me. A woman I had once paid to mop my floors was now standing next to me like a battle partner. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't looked away. She had brought me the truth piece by piece. And now I had everything I needed: the deed, the will, the forged mortgage, and my husband's final words. They had underestimated me, thought I would stay quiet, that I would die slowly in the background while they rehearsed their next renovation project. But now I saw clearly. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't overreacting. They were robbing me while smiling to my face, and that was about to end. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to throw a single plate. All I needed was paper, a signature, a plan. By the time the sun went down, I had every document laid out on the dining table like chess pieces. And in that quiet, resolute moment, I heard Richard's voice in my mind, not pleading, not fearful, but certain. "You're stronger than they think." And this time, I believed him. The night after I met with Stanley DeMarco, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because I couldn't stop hearing Richard's voice in my mind. His calm cadence, his dry humor, the way he'd softly clear his throat before saying something that mattered. It had been over a year since the funeral. But in moments like these, he felt so close, I could almost smell his aftershave in the hallway. He had always been quiet about his concerns, especially when it came to Daniel. "He's smart, Maggie," he'd say, "but he's soft." And that softness can become dangerous when someone sharper whispers in his ear. Back then, I thought it was just father-son tension. Now I wasn't so sure. I sat at the dining room table, the manila envelope Elena had given me, beside a cup of lukewarm tea. I unfolded the journal entry again. Richard's handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, looping, deliberate. He didn't write for flair. He wrote for clarity. And what he wrote now felt like a breadcrumb trail I had ignored for far too long. I worry Vanessa's ambition is getting into Daniel's bones. She's not cruel. She's careful. And I think he's letting her become the loudest voice in his life. That line echoed in my chest like a low drumbeat. Vanessa wasn't just manipulative. She was calculated. And Daniel, my son, wasn't standing beside her. He was hiding behind her, letting her take the wheel while pretending not to notice when she drove over the people who raised him. I closed the journal gently, as if it were still alive. And in a way it was. It was Richard speaking from the past, trying to protect me from a future he suspected but couldn't control. He must have known I wouldn't act unless I had no choice. So he left me a map. And I was finally ready to follow it. But there was more. When Elena handed me the journal, she hadn't just brought me words. She had brought me confirmation, a piece of Richard's soul. Something he'd hidden, not to keep secrets, but to wait until I was strong enough to face the truth. She had found it, tucked behind a book in the den, wedged into a space only someone who'd been in that house for years would know existed. She didn't even say much when she gave it to me. She just placed it on the counter and whispered, "This was his, wasn't it?" I nodded. My hands shook when I touched the leather cover. It was old soft at the edges and smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I had seen Richard write in it for years, late at night, always claiming it helped him sort his brain. I never read it. I thought it was private. I didn't want to invade his solitude. Now I realized that journal wasn't just for him, it was for me. The earlier entries were typical notes about his back pain, frustrations with his cardiologist, and gripes about Daniel quitting his steady job to start a consulting business with Vanessa's brother. But then, about 10 pages in, his tone shifted. The language turned sharp, intentional, like he was no longer writing to himself. "Vanessa wants Daniel to accelerate the future. I read that sentence 3 times. He continued. "She doesn't say it out loud, but I know what she means. They're planning, waiting for me to die and for Maggie to fold." I thought I was protecting her by giving her everything in the trust. But now I wonder, maybe I made her a target. I stopped breathing. He saw it. He saw everything I had been too afraid to name. Vanessa wasn't just rude. She was playing the long game. And Daniel wasn't just absent, he was complicit. Whether he fully realized it or not, he had been pulled into her world. And in that world, I was a stepping stone, an obstacle. I closed the journal and held it against my chest like a life preserver in a storm. I wasn't paranoid, I wasn't overreacting. My instincts had been screaming at me for months, but I had buried them under politeness, under guilt, under the desperate hope that family would always mean something. But family, I realized, doesn't excuse betrayal. Blood doesn't erase deception. And love, real love, doesn't let you drown quietly while pretending not to see the water rise. Richard had tried to prepare me. In his own quiet way, he'd left me the tools to fight back. But the most powerful thing he gave me wasn't legal, it was emotional. He trusted me to act, to defend myself, to hold the line when the people closest to me crossed it. That night I didn't cry. I lit a candle. I poured myself a glass of red wine, and I laid out every document I now had like puzzle pieces, the forged mortgage, the original deed, the will, the journal, the trust papers. Together, they told a story. Not of loss, but of awakening. Vanessa had tried to outplay me. Daniel had tried to avoid me. But neither of them realized they were dealing with a woman who had learned how to survive grief, loneliness, and now betrayal. I folded the journal, slid it into a protective sleeve, and placed it in my file folder. I didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this: they had fired the first shot. And now, I was ready to respond with silence, with strategy, and with the full weight of the truth behind me. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I wasn't exhausted, I was focused. I hadn't slept, but my mind had never been sharper. The documents were spread across my dining table like pieces of a silent war plan: the forged mortgage, the original deed, the trust documents, Richard's journal, and the warning he wrote me in his own hand. The manila envelope from Elena lay beside them like a dagger cloaked in paper. For years, I had avoided conflict in the name of grace. I smiled through discomfort. I stayed silent to keep the peace. But now I understood what Richard had been trying to teach me with his quiet scribbles and carefully arranged legal protections. Peace without protection is just surrender. I dressed with purpose, navy slacks, a crisp blouse, and the dark blazer Richard used to say made me look like I chaired every committee in town. I looked in the mirror before I left the house and didn't see a grieving widow anymore. I saw a woman who finally remembered her power. At 9:57 a.m., I stepped into the law office of Stanley DeMarco. It had been years since I'd seen him in person. His hair was whiter now, his glasses thicker, but his handshake was just as firm. He ushered me into his office without small talk. There was something about the way I had said "no family present" on the phone that told him this wasn't a routine visit. I opened my folder on his desk and laid out the forged mortgage first. His brow furrowed immediately. "This is your name," he said slowly, "but this is not your signature." I nodded. That's exactly what I said. He studied the document, flipped through the attached bank letters and loan statements, then looked up at me with something between concern and disbelief. "Who did this?" "My son," I said. "But I believe it was orchestrated by his wife." Stanley leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "You understand what this is, right? This is mortgage fraud. Criminal. If prosecuted, it carries prison time." I didn't blink. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said. "But I am interested in reclaiming control." He nodded slowly, then pointed at the next stack. "This, the original deed." "Yes. Full ownership under my name. No co-signers, no clauses for inheritance while I'm alive. Richard made sure of that." He flipped through, confirming every page. "Well, your husband was thorough. I'll give him that." Next came the will and trust documents. Then finally, I slid across Richard's handwritten journal entry and the letter he'd left for me. Stanley read it, then sat back in his chair again, this time softer. "He knew," he said. "He saw it coming." I swallowed hard. He tried to warn me. I just didn't want to believe it. We spent the next hour drafting the legal steps I needed to take. First, remove Daniel as financial power of attorney. That paperwork was filed before I even left the office. Second, freeze all accounts he had access to. Stanley made a call to the fiduciary team while I was still in the room. Third, initiate formal proceedings to begin the eviction and prepare the home for sale. That part was complicated, but not impossible, especially since I had documentation title and a very good reason. When I left his office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt anchored. I wasn't acting out of rage. I wasn't driven by revenge. I was enforcing boundaries that should have never been crossed. That afternoon, I returned to the house, not to talk, not to argue, but to deliver notice. Vanessa opened the door wearing yoga pants, sipping a green smoothie, her smile as plastic as ever. "Oh, Maggie, you should have called first." I stepped inside without answering. "I need to speak with both of you. Now." She must have heard the shift in my tone because she didn't offer a snide remark this time. She called Daniel, and they both stood at the kitchen island like two kids about to be grounded. I pulled out the forged mortgage and laid it down. "This," I said, tapping it with my finger, "has my name on it. But it's not my signature, and you know it." Daniel's face paled. Vanessa crossed her arms and scoffed. "You're mistaken." I turned to Daniel. "Look me in the eye and tell me I signed this." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Finally, he whispered, "How did you get that?" "It doesn't matter," I said calmly. "What matters is that you used my name to take out debt on a home you don't even own." I pulled out the deed and laid it beside the mortgage. "This house is mine. Richard left it to me, fully, legally, and I just removed you as power of attorney. The joint accounts are frozen, and this house is being listed for sale." Vanessa's face turned crimson. "You can't do that." "I just did." Daniel tried to plead. "Mom, please. We were going to pay it back." "You forged my name," I said louder now. "That's not a mistake. That's a felony." He lowered his eyes. Vanessa didn't. She stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You're punishing your family over some paperwork. You're destroying us." "No," I said, gathering my things. "I'm correcting the mistake of letting either of you believe this house was ever yours." Then I turned to Daniel one last time. "You let her mock me in front of strangers. You let her write over everything I built. And then you stole from me. So no, I'm not punishing you." I reached for the door. I'm saving what's mine. And for the first time in years, I walked away without looking back. The next morning, I didn't wake up in a panic. I woke up with purpose. By 8:00 a.m., I was dressed and out the door, slacks, flats, and the deep navy blouse Richard always loved. "You look like you run the school board," he used to joke. That's exactly how I wanted to feel, like a woman in control, the kind who makes decisions, not excuses. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give them time to rehearse their lies or scrub the house of tension. I arrived just after noon. The sky was overcast gray and brooding, like it knew something was about to erupt. Vanessa opened the door, eyebrows raised in annoyance, face tight with fake warmth. "Oh," she said. "You should have called first, Maggie." "Get Daniel," I replied. "I need to speak with both of you. Now." She hesitated. Something in my voice, maybe the absence of apology, unsettled her. She turned and called him. They both stood across from me at the kitchen island like two teenagers caught sneaking out past curfew. I didn't sit. I didn't smile. I opened my bag and laid out the papers one by one like courtroom exhibits. "This," I said, tapping the forged mortgage form, "has my name on it. Except, I didn't sign it." Daniel's face lost all color. Vanessa leaned back, arms crossed, eyes already scanning for a defense. "You're mistaken," she said too quickly, her voice clipped. I turned to Daniel. "Look me in the eyes and tell me this is my signature." He tried. God help him, he tried. His lips parted, a breath escaped, but no words came. And in that silence, everything changed. He didn't even try to lie. That was worse. That was confirmation. "How did you get that?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's not the question you should be asking," I said. "The question is, what else have you done?" I pulled out the original deed to the house. "You used my name to take out a loan on a home that you don't legally own. This house It belongs to me. Fully. Richard made sure of that. You both knew it, and you acted anyway? Vanessa scoffed. You've gone senile. I didn't flinch. Actually, I brought documentation from a licensed physician. I'm of sound mind, fully competent, and now legally protected. You can call that elder abuse all you want, but I call it what it is, fraud. Daniel opened his mouth again, the pleading tone returning. It was just to cover the remodel. We were going to pay it back. I gave a sharp, bitter laugh. With what? Your startup consulting gig, her charity brunches. No, you weren't planning to pay anything back. You were planning on me disappearing, quietly, conveniently. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice rising. You're being dramatic. It's not like we tried to kill you. You're still alive, aren't you? That did it. I stood taller. Yes, I'm alive, and I plan to stay that way, which is why, as of this morning, Daniel is no longer my financial power of attorney. All shared accounts are frozen. This house is being listed this week. You'll receive formal notice within the next 48 hours. Vanessa flushed deep red. You can't do that. You're punishing your family over one mistake. I gathered the papers, tucking them back into my bag with precise care. No, I'm correcting a mistake I made when I allowed you to feel entitled to something that was never yours. Daniel stepped toward me softer now. Mom, please, can we talk in private? I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw not the boy I once stayed up with through his fevers, not the young man who held my hand when Richard died. I saw a man who had let his wife mock me, manipulate me, and betray me. And he had stood there silent. I shook my head. No more private talks. No more secrets. Secrets are how people like you operate. I'm done being quiet. You have 30 days. After that, you're out. As I turned to leave, Vanessa spat behind me. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a bitter old woman. I paused at the door, hand on the knob. Then I turned slightly, looked her dead in the eye. Better. Bitter than blind. I stepped into the afternoon sun, heart pounding. The air felt sharper, like it had been filtered through fire. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a background character in my own story. I felt like a force. A woman with leverage, with truth, with power. 3 days passed before I heard anything. And it wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. It was Vanessa's voice on my voicemail shrieking, You can't just kick us out. We've built our lives here. Daniel's kids grew up in this house. You're destroying your own family for what pride? You're disgusting, I didn't call back. I saved the voicemail and emailed it to my lawyer instead. That same afternoon, I met with a real estate agent named Marcy. She was sharp no-nonsense and smelled faintly of citrus and ink. We walked through each room, my rooms, while Vanessa's wine glasses and shoes littered the hallway like passive-aggressive props. Marcy took notes, complimented the crown molding Richard installed in '92, and we discussed pricing. Vanessa stood at the top of the stairs like a gargoyle glaring. You're pathetic, she muttered. I didn't even look up. I signed the paperwork at the kitchen island, the same spot where they tried to steal from me. And as I signed, I realized they'd made one fatal mistake. They underestimated the silence of a woman who'd had enough. Saturday came like a final drumbeat, steady, inevitable, and louder the closer it got. By 9:00 a.m., I was already dressed and out the door. I wore a clean beige blazer, a touch of lipstick I hadn't worn since Richard's funeral, and in my bag were 2 signed copies of the sale agreement. Outside, the sky was wide and cloudless, like even the weather had cleared itself for what was about to unfold. The locksmith was waiting at the curb in a navy van, sipping coffee, his toolbox open, like a soldier sharpening his blade. I nodded as I approached. Everything that matters is already gone, I said. He didn't ask questions. Just tipped his cap and got to work one lock at a time removing Daniel and Vanessa from my house. Not with words, but with quiet turns of a screwdriver. The front door, the side gate, the security panel, all of it changed in under an hour. Meanwhile, guests had begun to arrive. Vanessa's charity brunch, an event she had been hyping on social media for weeks, was unfolding across the lawn. Early birds in floral dresses sipped mimosas beside a champagne truck parked by the curb. The patio buzzed with small talk, artificial smiles, and that false warmth people manufacture when they're networking. She didn't know yet. I sat in my car down the block, watching as Vanessa floated through the crowd like a politician gesturing toward flower arrangements, touching arms, laughing at nothing. She waved at a photographer like she was announcing a campaign. Then just before 11:00, the truck driver walked up to the front door tray in hand and rang the bell. Again. It didn't open. Confused, he looked around, knocking harder. Murmurs rippled through the guests. Vanessa rushed over heels, stabbing the lawn, her voice rising as the lock refused to turn. "It's jammed. I swear it's jammed." She laughed nervously. That was my cue. I stepped out of the car, slowly walking toward the house like a principal entering a chaotic classroom. All heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Vanessa spotted me. Her face shifted from confused to furious in one breath. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, hurrying toward me, trying to block my view of the guests. I smiled gently, pulled a thick manila envelope from my bag, and raised my voice, just enough to cut through the music. "Hosting the final farewell," I said. The crowd quieted. "As of yesterday, this property has been sold. New owners take possession next month. So, I'd advise everyone here to enjoy your drink. This might be the last one served on this patio." There was a stunned pause. Someone let out an awkward laugh. A few people looked around, waiting to see if this was a joke. But Vanessa's face said everything it wasn't. Daniel came out from the side yard, his face pale and sweaty. "Mom, stop," he said, quietly pleading again. "You don't have to do this here." I turned to him calmly. "Actually, I do. Because every time I tried to do it privately, you ignored me. Every time I whispered, she screamed louder. So now I'm speaking her language." I handed him the envelope. "Inside, you'll find the sale documents, the eviction notice, and your forged mortgage agreement. Don't worry, I haven't pressed charges yet." Vanessa stepped forward, face twisted with panic and rage. "You vindictive old bitch," she hissed. "You think you've won? Everyone here sees what kind of monster you are." But before she could lunge, Elena appeared like a guardian angel from the crowd. Calm, composed, and holding up her phone. "Smile, Vanessa," she said. "Wouldn't want your donors missing this." The scene froze. Vanessa stopped mid-step. She realized all at once how many phones were out, how many conversations had turned into whispers behind wine glasses. She was no longer the hostess. She was the spectacle. "You'll regret this," she spat. "I already regret trusting either of you," I said. People began to drift away slowly at first, then in waves. A woman in pearls whispered something to a man beside her. A younger couple exchanged awkward glances and made for the gate. The champagne driver stood by the truck, unsure whether to pour or pack up. Vanessa stood, rooted in place, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Daniel hovered behind her, the envelope still in his hand, as if it burned to touch. I didn't wait for more. I turned to Elena and nodded. "You ready? Always," she said, linking her arm through mine. We walked down the path past the garden Richard once planted, past the spot where Daniel learned to ride a bike, past the woman who tried to take everything and got caught in the spotlight she created for herself. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I just kept walking. Because this wasn't the end of a brunch. It was the beginning of my freedom. 2 days later, at exactly 7:42 a.m., the sheriff's deputy hand-delivered the eviction notice. Vanessa reportedly screamed so loud, the neighbor's dog barked for 10 minutes. Elena Ever-Faithful watched from her car 2 houses down with a coffee and a muffin. She texted me later, "You'd think someone stole her kidney." By Thursday, the moving truck came. Just one, despite Vanessa's earlier brag about needing 3 for all her designer furniture. By Saturday, they were gone. No goodbye, no apology, not even a text from Daniel. They slipped out like thieves in broad daylight. And I didn't lift a finger to stop them, because finally, I didn't owe them anything. The house stood empty for 2 weeks after they left. quiet, sunlit still. And for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me again. Not because I had reclaimed it legally, but because I had finally let it go emotionally. I walked through it slowly, room by room, like visiting an old friend in the hospital before they passed. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was something better clean. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something older, something deeper memory maybe. I touched the groove in the stair railing where Daniel used to slide down in his pajamas. I paused at the hallway wall where Richard insisted on hanging our wedding photo crooked because he thought it looked more romantic that way. I ran my fingers along the fireplace mantel, now scuffed and worn, not with rage, but with time. I didn't want to stay, not because I didn't love what the house once was, but because I finally accepted that what it once was no longer existed. It had been carved away slowly, deliberately, by silence, by manipulation, by the unbearable weight of pretending everything was fine. Letting go didn't feel like defeat. It felt like permission. The sale closed 2 days later. Marcus and Shelby Foster, a young black couple with a rescue dog and a newborn. He worked as an electrician. She did graphic design from home. They'd written a letter with their offer, not out of obligation, but out of respect. "We've dreamed of a house like this," Shelby wrote. Not just the space, but the feeling. That sentence stayed with me. They didn't want the house for prestige or for parties on the patio. They wanted it for life, for quiet mornings and messy afternoons, for scraped knees and warm dinners, for living not for appearances. That's how I knew they were the right ones. We met at the signing. I shook their hands and left the keys in a small glass bowl on the counter. "You'll love the kitchen in spring," I told Shelby. "It gets morning light all the way to the sink." She smiled and squeezed my hand. No words, just understanding. Like we were passing something sacred between us. That evening, I drove to my new place. A small condo near the library. No guest wing, no antique crown molding. But it had soft light and sturdy floors. It was walking distance to a bakery that sold real butter croissants and a community garden with benches under willow trees. I didn't have a fireplace, but I had a window that opened just wide enough to let the breeze kiss the edge of my tea mug. I unpacked slowly, intentionally, one drawer at a time, one photo at a time. I lit the candle Richard once bought me at a Christmas market. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for what I never quite knew, and I sat alone, but not lonely, for the first time in years. Elena came by that night around 8, takeout in one hand, and a bottle of soda in the other. She looked different, freer, like someone who had finally put her name on her own life. "You did it," she said, handing me a paper bag that smelled like roasted garlic and lime. "You didn't just win, you freed yourself." I nodded, my hands wrapped around the warm container, not for the food, but for the grounding. "I didn't know how heavy it all was," I said softly until I let it go. She raised her cup. "To never letting anyone treat us like the help again." I laughed, remembering the moment that started it all. Vanessa's voice, drunk and cruel, calling me her maid in my own backyard. It had cut so deep then, but now it barely scratched the surface. Because the truth was, the woman Vanessa had compared me to, Elena, turned out to be more family than either of them ever were. It wasn't blood that defined loyalty, it was presence. Quiet, unwavering, undeniable presence. 2 weeks after the Fosters moved in, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in over a decade, rearranging my bookshelves. Not because I had to, but because I had the energy to care about the order of things again. Alphabetizing fiction. Setting aside old poetry. Dusting spines like greeting old friends. Halfway through, Elena stopped by again, this time with a manila folder in her hand and a grin on her face. "You're not the only one starting fresh," she said, sliding the document toward me. It was a business license, Elena's home harmony cleaning and organization services. "You went legit?" I asked, laughing. "Not just legit," she said. 5 regular clients, 1 girl I'm training part-time, and 2 referrals waiting in my inbox. Turns out people are happy to pay for what I've been doing for scraps for years. She didn't just get a business license. She got her name back. And in some way, so did I. Later that night, after she left and I washed the dishes, I sat on the balcony and wrote something I hadn't written in a long time, a list. Not a to-do list. A next list. Join the local book club. Visit the art museum downtown. Sign up for watercolor classes. Richard always said I'd be dangerous if I ever stopped putting everyone else first. Now maybe I finally had. Elena arrived that Friday afternoon with the same confident energy she always carried into a room, but this time something had shifted. It was in the way she walked. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, like someone who had finally stopped asking permission to exist. She placed a bottle of mid-shelf red wine on my new kitchen counter, then carefully opened the manila folder she'd tucked under her arm. "I've got something to show you," she said, smiling like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Inside was a freshly printed business license, shiny official and bearing her name at the top in bold black letters, Elena's Home Harmony, Cleaning and Organization Services. I stared at it for a moment, letting the weight of it settle in. Not just the paper, but everything behind it, the hours, the hesitation, the invisible labor, the dignity that had so often been swallowed in service of others. "You went legit?" I asked, grinning. "Not just legit," she said. "I've got 5 regular clients already, 1 part-time girl I'm training, 2 more referrals waiting in my inbox. Turns out people are more than happy to pay for what I've been doing quietly for years." Her voice didn't have a trace of resentment, only pride. A kind of calm power that comes not from revenge but from clarity, the kind that blooms when a woman finally sees her own worth and refuses to bury it ever again. I touched the paper lightly with my fingertips. "You used to say you didn't know how to work for yourself, that you weren't business-minded." She nodded, her smile softening. "I didn't know until I watched you burn your whole life down and start over with a straight back. That's what did it. You reminded me I'm not just someone in the background. I'm the reason some of those places run." Her words sank deep, because the truth was, I had always known Elena was strong, but I hadn't realized how much she had been watching me the whole time. How much we had been quietly witnessing each other for years in the margins beyond the roles we'd been boxed into. Employer and employee, homeowner and housekeeper. No, we were something more now. We were survivors of different wounds, yes, but we were also architects of our own rebuildings. I poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. "You're the reason I didn't fall apart," I said. "You pulled me out of the fog when I didn't even know I was in one." She took a sip and leaned on the counter. "You know what's wild?" she asked, tilting her head. "Vanessa called me. Twice. My eyebrows shot up." "She did?" Elena nodded, left a voicemail, pretended like nothing happened. Said she wanted to make peace and maybe talk about future opportunities. I nearly laughed. "Opportunities?" She smirked. "She must think I'm still desperate, that I'm still the woman who would show up early to fold napkins and keep my head down just for a paycheck. But she doesn't understand once someone learns their value, they don't go backward to sit at a rotted table." The room went quiet, not in discomfort, but in reverence, because we both knew she wasn't just talking about herself. She was talking about both of us, about every woman who's ever been taken for granted while carrying the emotional weight of an entire household on her back. Elena had taken all that quiet knowledge, the way to make things feel safe, clean, held, and turned it into a business. But more importantly, she had turned it into agency. She didn't need a seat at Vanessa's table. She had built her own. And just like that, we toasted not to success, not even to revenge, but to something quieter and more dangerous self-definition. "To self-employment," she said. "To boundaries," I added. "To dignity," she offered. "To silence broken," I replied. We clinked glasses, and in that moment, it felt like more than a toast. It felt like a ceremony. A closing, an exorcism. Not of people, but of the smallness we had both been asked to live inside for too long. Later that night, after she left and I put the glasses in the sink, I stood on my small balcony overlooking the street, letting the cool air wrap around me. I thought about how strange it was the person who ended up by my side in the end wasn't someone I raised or someone I married. It was someone I once paid by the hour to mop floors and wipe windows. And yet she was the only one who saw me, really saw me. She never asked me to be smaller, never rolled her eyes, never measured my worth by how quiet I stayed. And maybe that's why we both rose at the same time, because real friendship doesn't grow in silence. It grows in witness. Elena didn't just build a business. She built a spine. And watching her do that didn't make me envious. It made me want more too. Not out of revenge, not out of bitterness, but because healing, once it begins, becomes contagious. And now, we were both free. It was a Thursday afternoon when I finally sat down to write the letter. The windows were open, the breeze was soft, and someone's wind chimes were clinking gently in the distance, like the house was exhaling with me. The chaos had passed. The signatures were dry. The house was sold. The locks were changed. But something still lingered unfinished, unspoken. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't anger. It was love. And it was for the only two people I hadn't truly spoken to through all of this, my grandchildren, Laya and Thomas. Two sharp-eyed, open-hearted kids who didn't ask to be born into any of this, who had hugged me the last time they saw me without hesitation, who had once sat on my lap after a school play, sticky with juice boxes, asking if I remembered to bring extra cookies. I waited to write to them until the dust had settled. I didn't want the letter to come from grief or fury. I wanted it to come from truth. And even more than that, I wanted it to come from peace. I began simply. Dear Laya and Thomas, you probably won't read this for a while. Maybe not until you're older. Maybe not until you start asking your own questions about why things changed. I paused, staring at those lines, making sure they felt right. Then I continued. I want you to know that none of this was your fault. I love you both so much that it hurts sometimes. I loved you when you were born, when you said your first words, when you came running to me in the backyard, asking for more sprinkles or another bedtime story. And I still love you now, even if I don't see you every weekend, even if things feel different. I told them what I thought they deserved to know. Not the legal battle, not the forged mortgage, not the shame I had to swallow at that backyard party, but the heart of the story. The house you remember wasn't just walls and rooms. It was where your father grew up, where your grandfather fixed the old leaky sink 3 times, where we burned the turkey one Thanksgiving and had cereal instead. That house had a history, and I tried to preserve it. I tried to hold the family together quietly behind the scenes, but sometimes love isn't enough when people forget how to show it. I didn't villainize their parents, but I didn't lie either. I know your parents may tell you a different version of what happened. They may say I was harsh or selfish or unfair, and maybe from where they're standing, it looks that way. But you should know this, I only acted when I was pushed past the point of silence, when I had no choice left but to protect what your grandfather and I built. I didn't take the house from anyone. I protected it. I protected myself. And I walked away, not because I stopped caring, but because I finally started caring about myself too. I included 2 photographs in the envelope. One was from the summer of 1989. Richard and I sitting on the porch, his hand resting on mine, both of us laughing about something long forgotten. The second was from Laya's last birthday party. She was wearing a paper crown made of gold foil and had frosting on her cheek. I was holding her hand, promising pinky to pinky that I'd never forget the sprinkles next time. That promise still mattered to me, even now, even with everything. If you ever want to visit, you can, I wrote. There's no pressure, no tests, just an open door, cookies in the jar, and a woman who still knows how to play Go Fish. I folded the letter carefully, pressed the photos flat, and sealed the envelope without a return address. Not because I didn't want one, but because I wanted them to open it when they were ready, not when someone forced them. When I finished, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tender, like I had just mended something, not torn something down. That weekend, I donated the last of Richard's old books to the local library and finally walked into the watercolor class I had been circling in the community brochure for months. I wasn't good. Not yet. My colors bled too fast. My lines were hesitant. But I smiled anyway, because it was mine. That evening, I made spaghetti for one, lit a candle, and curled into bed with a paperback mystery and a cup of mint tea. The window was cracked open, and the room was filled with something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Stillness. Safety. Not because someone was protecting me, but because I had learned to protect myself. Later that night, Elena texted me a photo of her new business cards and a screenshot of her first 5-star review. She saved my house and my sanity, the woman had written. I smiled at the screen and texted back, "She does that." I thought about Vanessa sometimes, rarely, but briefly. Not with hate. Just in passing. Like a lesson. A name in a book I'd already closed. I didn't hate her, I pitied her. Because a woman like that who builds her world on control and appearances never really feels safe even when she's winning. And Daniel, I hoped he found clarity. I hoped he found courage. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. My job was done. I had protected what mattered. I had reclaimed what was mine. And most importantly, I had started again. Not from ashes, but from solid ground. Sometimes the greatest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people we raised, the ones we made sacrifices, for the ones we believed would stand beside us when the world turned cruel. But as Margaret's story reveals, love without boundaries becomes a tool for exploitation. Silence, when prolonged, becomes complicity in your own erasure. This story isn't just about reclaiming a house, it's about reclaiming dignity. It's about the moment a woman realizes that being quiet doesn't keep the peace, it just delays the collapse. Margaret didn't yell. She didn't fight dirty. She gathered her facts, her strength, and her self-respect. And then she acted with strategy, not spite. The lesson here is simple but profound. You don't have to scream to be strong. You don't have to burn bridges to walk away. You just have to remember who you are and who you're not willing to become just to keep others comfortable. For anyone who has ever been made to feel small in a space they built, for anyone whose kindness has been mistaken for weakness, and for anyone who's been waiting for the right time to draw the line, that time is when you finally choose yourself. This story teaches us that legal power, emotional clarity, and personal boundaries are not acts of vengeance. They are acts of survival, of rebirth, of refusing to be used as a placeholder in someone else's narrative. And sometimes the person who helps you rise won't be family by blood, but someone who sees your soul, stands by you in silence, and reminds you that you're not just surviving, you're rebuilding. Because the moment you stop asking for permission is the moment you start writing your own ending. And that's when life begins again.